and they're not over the age of 60, the risk is extremely low that anything serious will happen to them. But it's not, we also heard it's not a matter of safe versus unsafe. It's about making sure that we mitigate the risks, which we can easily do. We can take care of the students, we can take care of the teachers. And the other thing that we've heard, and Dr. Hamilton's probably going to touch on this, is that the students aren't likely to take it home with them. For some reason, the younger students in particular, they don't seem to spread it when they go home. So we're still studying it, but it's extremely important that we actually follow the real science and not just the fear that has been created by this disease, and it is a serious disease. And for our people who are in nursing homes and over the age of 80, my mother who's 90 is not in a nursing home, but I worry about her. But for the students going to school, the risk is fairly minimal, and we need to let the local school divisions make their decisions based on the conditions in their community and based on the real science, which says this is not a high risk and we can mitigate the risks that do exist. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Doctor.
Thank you, Congressman Griffith, and thank you all for being here today. I'm Dr. Bob Hamilton. I'm a pediatrician from Santa Monica, California. I have a couple of points I'd like to make. First of all, I think it's important that you all realize that children in general are not getting sick in large numbers from SARS-CoV-2 infection. When they do get sick, thankfully they get better. Many of them are actually asymptomatic. And finally, it's important to realize that children are extremely they're dying at very, very low numbers, almost zero, truly. Number two, children, as the congressman mentioned, are not the super spreaders we initially assumed them to be. Yes, there is a potential, but it turns out it's not really happening. Number three, the emotional and physical toll that long-term quarantine is having on children is not positive. It is very clear that the depression, stress, anxiety is increasing in large numbers, especially in students in the junior high and high school age category. Schools do need to reopen this fall because we all know that face-to-face instruction is far better than online instruction. Schools exist not for teachers, they exist for students, and we need to get them back in school. Furthermore, working parents simply cannot do a good job at trying to educate their children. It is failing. That has been documented. I think it's pretty clear. Furthermore, we can't wait for a vaccine or effective treatment to finally put them back to school. As has been mentioned by many authorities, a vaccine may be really, truly months, maybe years away from being available to the population. Finally, I believe that getting kids back to school is ultimately the fulcrum of getting the economy going again. The economy not going has other deleterious effects on our health and our well-being. And this is when kids get back to school, workers can get back to the job, the economy can get back. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. Now we're going to go to Dr. Richard Urso from Houston, Texas. And when he's done, we're going to go to Scott Perry, Congressman from Pennsylvania, and then Dr. Congressman Andy Harris. And so with that, Dr. Urso.
Thank you all for having me here. I'm from Houston, Texas, and I'm going to dovetail a little bit on what Dr. Hamilton said. The harm to children is higher by staying home than it is to going to school. And the big picture is that the harm that we're suffering there is hard to see. And I think in general, what we're going to end up doing is basically not having an end game that's ever going to happen. There's no way that there's going to be an RNA viral vaccine that's going to be anytime soon. We're going to be dealing with this strategically next summer. We'll be still doing the same thing. If we wait for a vaccine to come, that's not going to probably come around. There's no good RNA viral vaccines. And I think at the end of the day, we have to look at the stats and say children are harmed very infrequently. Almost 0% of children are affected by this disease. And if we look, even under 45, it's almost zero. And we get up to 60 if you have comorbidities and you're under 60. So most of the teachers are not going to be heavily affected. And then we mitigate those risks to those teachers. Maybe they teach from home. We look at that picture because I think that's part of what has to be evaluated. It's not only the students but the teachers also. And I think there's strategies that can be set in place that can make that happen. I think some of the other last thought is that some of this fear and that's occurring here is coming from some of our CDC and FDA guidelines are creating some of that fear, and I think it's really important that we have leaders that understand how much that's contributing to the amount of fear people have in this country right now. Thank you.
Well, you heard it right here. There's more damage being done by keeping schools closed than by allowing them to open. We need to base our decisions, our policy decisions, on the science. And what we know now is that children are not the super spreaders that we once thought that they might be. We do know this, though. Suicide is the #2 cause of death for children between 10 and 22 or 24 years of age. Suicide. Locking children up, locking our young people up is not a solution. It's actually worse than the virus itself. So we need to base our decisions and our policies not on fear. We're Americans and we can conquer anything, and we should conquer this. Schools need to be open. Children need to learn. Schools exist to teach children. That's why they're there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Congressman Andy Harris from Maryland. I'm a physician by training. Look, this is a very dynamic situation we're in. The fact of the matter is we know a lot more about this disease than we did 4 months ago, and I would urge the CDC to be dynamic in their guidelines. For instance, we know that children, when they get the disease, are largely asymptomatic, have an exceedingly low, as Dr. Hamilton said, a fatality rate near zero. They don't apparently spread the disease readily. Maybe it's because of what we learned about T-cell immunity recently, and what children do with T-cell immunity. The bottom line is that it is safe for children to go back to school. It is not safe for them to remain at home. They're probably much safer in school than they are at home in terms of getting this disease or having this disease spread to them. And as has been mentioned, they're going to come in contact in school generally with people who are of relatively low risk. And it's time to get the economy going, get children back to school, get their education back on track. It's time to do it. We've learned a lot in the past 4 months. Let's use all that scientific knowledge, what we've learned from other countries around the world that have sent their children back to school safely. It's time to send them back to school safely, and for each jurisdiction to take into consideration what their community needs as they bring their children back to school.
Thank you, Andy. Now we're going to hear from Dr. Simone Gold, who's an emergency room doc in LA, and also an attorney. And that's important because I'm an attorney, and I think you should know folks who are attorneys. And then after she's done, we're going to go to Dr. Taryn Clark, a neurologist. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As our congressman said, I'm a board-certified emergency physician. I think that's important because I do treat COVID patients all day long. That's what I do. And I'm here to tell you that this is not a risky problem or health situation for the younger generation. We are a society of all generations. The generation we need to be protecting, to the extent that we have any kind of restrictions, are older people with multiple comorbid conditions. The data is crystal clear. It is not ambiguous in the least. Everyone, I urge you, if you're worried about this, a parent, you're fearful about this, you can go yourself right now to cdc.gov and you can search by age, and you can see that people under age 24 essentially do not die from this condition. Which brings me to my main point about the schools. You must never forget that schools exist for the benefit of the children. They do not exist for the benefit and convenience of the adults. That always has to be first in mind when you consider school policies. Everything in life entails some risk. We need to put children where it is less risky. It is far riskier to keep children out of school than to keep them in school for many reasons that we've already heard. And lastly, we came here today as scientists and as doctors to share what we know to be scientifically true as physicians with congressmen. I urge parents who are listening, request a town hall meeting with your congressman. Require them to bring medical experts and the data and the science. Your fear will be assuaged. It is safe for your children to go back to school. It is much riskier for children not to go back to school, and you need to hear directly from frontline doctors, frontline experts. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to emphasize that the United States is not blazing a trail in terms of getting our kids back to school. We're not suggesting that as scientists we want to experiment on our children and our teachers as guinea pigs. That couldn't be farther from the case. There are many countries in the world who have already returned to school without distancing, without masks. They've returned to school as normally as it was before the lockdowns. So there are great examples from all over the world. They haven't seen a resurgence of death in those communities, and they haven't seen the elderly getting sick from those children. So what we're talking about today is not putting our children or our teachers at excessive risk for to answer a question of, is this the right path forward? It's already been demonstrated in multiple other countries that this is the right path forward, and it's time for the United States to follow those examples. Thank you.
Thank you, Drs. Gold and Clark. And now we're going to hear from Congressman Dan Bishop from North Carolina, after which Ralph Norman from South Carolina, Congressman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Congressman Biggs, and thank you to these courageous and brilliant physicians who've joined us today to make the case on the basis of science and data that our children need to be in school and that we can't keep schools shut down. I heard two things today that I want to highlight. Others have had comments on other points. Dr. Hamilton said something at the beginning of our session that was impressive to me, or that struck me. I'm the last of 5 children. Dr. Hamilton has had 6 children. And as he said, he adores children. And I know that those who advocate for the interests of children, those who believe in public education, know that children are being harmed, deeply harmed, by extended periods out of school. That needs to get resolved. And we're not going to have a situation in which we can say it's a polar question. You either have safety or risk. There are a multitude of risks in our lives at all times. We always have a multitude of viruses in our society. But this virus, thankfully, does not significantly harm children. And children, therefore, can be in school, and they must be in school, because we cannot abide the harm that will occur to them otherwise. Again, to you physicians who've joined us, I really do appreciate what you're contributing to the American dialogue. People need to hear your voices, and they need to be aware, because you give them comfort and help them with what they already know, and that is that the right thing is for their children to be in school with teachers being educated so that they can have the benefits of strong education and the value that it provides in every human life. Thank you very much. Congressman Ralph Norman.
Thank you, Dan. Let me just end this by saying this. My takeaways this morning, and we had 5 physicians. They all represented different areas of expertise. They all 5 agreed it's time to open schools back up. Secondly, this is going to come from the grassroots. We've got to get all the teachers, the administration. It's time to open the schools. It's time to fight for what's best for the children. And as everyone up here has mentioned, children are suffering. They've got to get back in school. It's not workable now. It's not workable for the parents. So we're going to do this from the ground up. Andy, I want to thank you for leading us in the Freedom Caucus. We're going to take this issue to the people because it's the right thing at the right time, and it's right for the children. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ralph. Thank you, Ralph. I appreciate everyone appreciate the media for being here, and appreciate those who've spoken to us. We have time for maybe just a couple questions, if there's a question.
Dr. Harris, since you're among the medical positions, is also in Congress.
Yep.
The special education student doesn't necessarily understand health safety provisions that would be understood by other students in the school. How do you address that part of the school system?
Well, one of the points is that, as you have heard, other systems around the world have gone back to normal school conditions. That in fact, this idea that you have to separate people the students by 6 feet, even on a school bus, is probably not necessary. So I would address it by saying, let's learn from the international experience where other school systems have gone back to basically pre-COVID school conditions without serious repercussions for their communities.
May I?
Please.
You know, you brought up an issue that's near and dear to my heart. You know, there's not one typical student. There are gifted students, there are special education students. They all matter. This lockdown and masks and 6 feet apart is extraordinarily harmful for children in the special education system. We hear that over and over again. They're losing opportunities to socialize. They're losing opportunities to do facial recognition. These are very important things for young children, especially those people with special needs. In fact, it's for the special needs children that I'm advocating at the moment. Thank you.
And if I might jump in, and as I think most people would recognize, there are a lot of students who fall into the category that you were talking about, but every IEP, every student with a special need may have something different. A lot of them we can deal with, but some are going to have special plans drawn up for this particular situation, and that's just something that every one of the school districts is going to have to deal with. But that's not a reason to not open the schools. It just makes it a little more complicated on our educators out there. But they're ready for the challenge in my district, I know that, and I think they're ready for the challenge across the country to try to make sure that every child has that opportunity to be educated to the best of their ability. But for a lot of the children, whether it be emotional needs or educational needs, where they have intellectual disabilities, etc., missing school puts them behind not just for a few weeks or a few months, but perhaps for a lifetime.
Thank you. I'd like to say one thing about this as a pediatrician. I mean, certainly putting the kids back in school will require thinking and a process. It won't be maybe exactly what we thought before. We need to do it creatively. We need to do it with an abundance of knowledge and wisdom, but it can be done. And the special education kids, indeed, they do present a unique situation, but there's no question in my mind that when we look at it, we look at each individual classroom uniquely. The getting them back is absolutely a possibility, and I don't think you're putting anybody at risk for doing that. Thank you.
This question actually addresses exactly why the CDC needs to revise the guidelines. The guidelines right now are going to prevent people from going back to school. Some of the people who are special needs are the ones who need to be in school the most. And with that said, there are other people, other students, and other adult teachers and others who work in schools who are going to be at high risk, and we have to make sure that we're balancing the deadliness of the virus and that we protect those and make arrangements for those while also balancing what's best for those who are not at high risk. And that's precisely why we're asking the CDC to revise the guidelines. We're not actually disrespecting the CDC in asking for this. We respect them enough that we want them to produce workable guidelines so that school districts around this country can have the answer for what to do with special needs students and others. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That'll conclude our press conference today. Thank you so very much for being here.
Andy, really a pleasure. Really a pleasure to hopefully see. Dr. Harris, hi, Bob Hamilton. Really.
Yeah, okay. We're in the middle of appropriations markup, so. But I'm on lunch hour, so I'm like, oh, I can make a press conference.
Yes. Well, thank you. Your words are very good. You know,
Right now we have Dr. speaking. We got to without. So you're going to get us the
probably do.
Yeah, probably do.
Oh, yeah.
I think I will be working on Sunday.
Look, I have a daughter who lives in Manhattan. She told me she goes, do you want us to? I go, yeah. I think everyone had it. You know, when you're dealing with infectious setting up no, so anyway, we'll see what happens. I think that